I am 70 years old, and last winter my own family tried to burn me alive while I was asleep. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, your lungs filled with smoke, your skin already stinging from the heat. Your body surrounded by fire you didn't start. You think it must be an accident, some horrible malfunction, but then you notice the window is locked from the outside and the door handle is burning hot because someone has set the fire deliberately. The people who should have been protecting me, my blood, my family, had decided I was worth more to them dead than alive. That night, I felt the betrayal of generations pressing down on my chest, heavier than the smoke itself. You don't expect to be killed by strangers, but maybe you can imagine that in a nightmare. You never expect the ones who carry your name, the ones who ate at your table, to light the match that turns your room into a coffin. I woke up because of a sound that should not have existed. It was the sound of an old music box, the one my late wife used to treasure. She had kept it on the top shelf of my wardrobe, and for years it had never moved, never played a single note. But that night, as if summoned by her spirit, it tumbled down, hit the floor, and its cracked melody burst out in the middle of the roaring fire. That melody cut through the chaos and pulled me back from unconsciousness. If it had not fallen, I would not be alive to tell you this story. I would have suffocated in my sleep, my death reported as a tragic accident, my house reduced to ashes, and my killers inheriting everything I had spent my life working for. I am telling you this because you need to understand how fragile trust really is. You think betrayal comes with warnings, but often it comes dressed as love. My children, my own flesh and blood, stood outside my burning room while I gasped for air. And even now, I can still hear the faint notes of that broken music box playing under the crackling wood as if my wife was trying to wake me from the other side. That sound is why I am here. That sound is why I can tell you about the night my family tried to murder me for money. Maybe you think this is exaggerated. Maybe you wonder if an old man like me is confusing dreams with reality. But I swear to you, the scars on my hands, the black stains in my lungs, and the police reports all prove that this happened. Betrayal is not something you can invent. It brands you, it etches itself into your skin. When the ones you love the most decide you are disposable, the world turns into a place where nothing feels safe anymore. I had given my whole life to raising these children. After my wife died, I became both father and mother. I cooked, I worked, I stayed up late to help them with their schoolwork. I was proud to watch them grow. I thought I had done enough to earn their loyalty, their respect. But apparently I had only taught them the value of my life insurance. They saw me not as a father, but as a number, a sum of money waiting to be collected the moment my heart stopped beating. And instead of waiting for nature, they decided to speed the process along with gasoline and a box of matches. The night they tried to kill me was colder than usual. The windows were frozen, the air outside sharp with winter. I remember going to bed with an extra blanket. I remember hearing voices in the hallway and assuming they were whispering about tomorrow's breakfast or bills or trivial things. I did not realize those whispers were about the timing of my death. I lay there thinking I was loved, thinking my home was a place of safety, when in reality every shadow outside my door was a predator counting down the minutes. Now, I want to ask you something. If your own children stood in front of you with a smile, could you imagine them plotting your death behind your back? Could you imagine them calculating how much you are worth on paper? How much insurance will pay once you are gone? Could you imagine them locking your window, slipping gasoline under your door, and walking away as you choke in your sleep? If you think the answer is no, then you are just like me before that night. Blind, trusting, unprepared. When I tell this story, people ask me if I saw it coming. They want to know if there were signs, if maybe I ignored something obvious. And I always tell them the same thing: you don't see betrayal until it burns you. You don't hear the lies until they echo in your ears. And sometimes it takes the sound of a music box falling in the middle of a fire to remind you that love can survive death, but greed can destroy the living. That night, as the flames licked the curtains and the smoke filled my lungs, I realized that I was alone in the world in a way I had never imagined. My wife was gone, my children were my executioners, and only a broken melody from decades ago stood between me and the grave. I ask you, if this had been your life, what would you do? Would you forgive? Would you fight? Would you surrender? If you think betrayal by family is the cruelest wound of all, comment number 1. Because tonight I will take you back into my past. I will show you how love turned into hatred, how trust turned into fire, and how an old music box became the reason I am still breathing. Before the flames, before the betrayal, there was a life that seemed unshakable. I want you to understand that I did not always live in suspicion or fear. I lived in love and warmth and the kind of trust that makes a man believe his family is his fortress. My story doesn't begin with gasoline or fire. It begins with laughter around a small wooden table, with the scent of fresh bread, and with the sound of a music box that once meant everything. I met my wife when we were both young, before the years carved lines on our faces and bent our backs. She was gentle but strong, in a way that never needed to be announced. When she smiled, the world slowed down. And when she cried, I felt like the oceans could swallow me whole. We built a life together in a modest house on the edge of town. Not rich, not grand, but filled with something no money could buy: loyalty. She gave me children, and with them came a sense of purpose that defined my every breath. The music box appeared in our lives one snowy December. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't even new, but she spotted it in a second-hand shop, cradled it in her hands, and whispered, "It sings like hope." I didn't understand what she meant at first, but when she wound the key and the fragile notes spilled into the air, I saw her eyes shine, as though she had captured eternity. From then on, that little wooden box with its chipped paint became the heartbeat of our home. Every birthday, every holiday, she would open it, and the melody would remind us that happiness didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be real. Our children grew up under that melody. When they were small, they would dance clumsily in the living room, their little feet pounding the floor as the box played its cracked tune. When they were sick, she would wind it and place it by their beds, believing the sound could soothe even fevers. And when arguments flared between siblings, she would set it on the table and let it play until the fighting stopped. That fragile sound was our peace treaty. I tell you this so you will understand the contrast. That same music box that once symbolized unity decades later would fall in a burning room and remind me that ghosts can save the living. But back then, it was simply love made into sound. When my wife became ill, everything changed. It was slow at first, little signs that life was leaving her too soon. But she never let the children see her weakness. She laughed, she cooked, she sang to them even when her hands trembled. And in those final months, the music box never stopped playing. She wound it every night before bed, whispering to me, "If one day you're alone, let this remind you that I am still here." I didn't think I would ever need those words. I thought we had more time. But death doesn't negotiate. One morning, she was simply gone, and the house felt emptier than I ever imagined possible. I tried to fill the silence with work, with chores, with the noise of life, but nothing could drown out the absence. The children cried for weeks, and I became both father and mother. I learned to braid my daughter's hair, to cook meals my sons would actually eat, to stitch torn shirts, to smile even when my own heart was cracking. I did it because I believed family had to survive, because I wanted to honor the promise she left me, protect them no matter what. I gave everything. Every coin I earned went to their education. Every hour I had was theirs. When they succeeded, I stood in the back clapping the loudest. When they failed, I sat beside them, holding the silence until they were ready to try again. And though I was tired, though my bones ached and my eyes grew dim, I believed it was worth it. That's what love makes you. Do you give and you give because you think one day it will return? The house was not big, but it was alive with memory. The kitchen still smelled of her spices, the curtains still carried her touch. And in the evenings when the children were asleep, I would wind the music box and let it play just for me. I would sit in the dark, eyes closed, pretending she was still there, humming along. That sound was both comfort and wound. It healed me and reminded me of everything I had lost. Years passed. The children grew, became adults, carried their own dreams. I thought I had succeeded. I thought they had learned the meaning of love, of sacrifice. I believed they would carry their mother's lessons in their hearts. How could I imagine that greed would one day drown out everything we had ever taught them? How could I imagine that the same people who danced to the music box as children would one day set fire to the house that once sheltered them? I want you to see this clearly. Once upon a time, I was not a victim. I was a husband, a father, a provider. I was surrounded by warmth. I was kissed goodnight. I was thanked for my work. I was the center of a small universe that felt eternal. And that is why the betrayal cut so deep. Because the deeper the love, the sharper the knife when it turns. Do you believe in family as an unbreakable bond? Do you believe that no matter how hard life gets, blood will always protect blood? If you do, you are like the man I used to be, before everything shattered. And I want you to tell me, comment. Yes, if you too once believed family could never betray you. After my wife passed, I lived with the certainty that my children were my only reason to keep breathing. For years, I thought our bond was solid, unbreakable, the kind of connection forged in grief and tested by survival. But betrayal never arrives with a trumpet. It creeps, it whispers. It plants seeds of doubt in moments you almost overlook. Looking back now, I realize the cracks had been forming long before the night of fire. I just refused to see them. It started with silence. My eldest son used to call me every evening after work. He would ask if I had eaten, if I needed anything from the market. Then the calls grew shorter, until they stopped altogether. At first I excused it. Life gets busy, careers demand attention. But silence has weight, and the weight pressed on me night after night. My daughter, who once sat by my side, telling me about every detail of her day, began to avoid eye contact. She stopped sharing stories, stopped laughing at my old jokes, stopped treating me like her confidant. Instead, her conversations grew transactional. Did you pay the bill? Can I borrow some money? Do you still keep your insurance papers in the desk drawer? I should have noticed then how unnatural her questions were, but I was blinded by love. Then came the small disappearances. A watch I had worn for 30 years gone. A few bills from the drawer missing. My wife's ring, which I had placed in a little wooden box, vanished. When I asked, they shrugged, said I must have misplaced it. That old age was playing tricks on me. Their tone was dismissive, but their eyes told a different story. Eyes that didn't meet mine eyes, that darted away too quickly. One evening I overheard my two sons arguing in the kitchen. Their voices were low but sharp, cutting through the air like knives. "He's not going to live forever," one whispered. "Why wait? The insurance is enough for both of us if we play it right." My heart froze. I wanted to storm in to demand answers, but fear chained me to my chair. What if I had misheard? What if suspicion poisoned my mind more than truth? So I sat there in the dark trembling and convinced myself that I had misunderstood. But the signs only multiplied. My meals tasted strange too, bitter, too metallic. My tea had a sour aftertaste. When I coughed, they smirked instead of showing concern. When I asked about my medicine, the labels had been switched. I began to wonder if I was losing my sanity. Could my own children really want me gone? The thought was unbearable, so I shoved it deep inside, burying it beneath excuses, stress, overwork, grief. Neighbors noticed before I did. Mrs. Alvarez from next door pulled me aside one afternoon. "I never see your children smile at you anymore," she whispered. "They look at you like you're already gone." Her words stung, but I brushed them away. Surely she was imagining things. Surely love couldn't rot that way. But then came the gas. One morning, I woke to the faint smell of fuel seeping through the hallway. At first, I thought it was from the garage, but when I checked, the containers were nearly empty. And later that week, I found matches hidden beneath a pile of laundry in my room. I confronted my youngest, asked what they were doing there, but he only laughed, said I was paranoid. "Dad, you need rest. You're imagining things. You're old." He patted my shoulder like I was a child and walked away. That was the moment my trust wavered. A father shouldn't suspect his children of planning his death, but a man can only ignore so much. I started locking my door at night, even though it was my own house. I began hiding money in places I thought they'd never find, inside shoes and old books behind loose bricks. Every time I looked at their faces, I wondered what they were hiding behind their smiles. But the most painful red flag came from something small, something ordinary. One evening, my daughter cooked dinner, a simple stew like her mother used to make. She placed the bowl in front of me, but there was no warmth in her voice, no care in her eyes. "Eat," she said flatly. And when I picked up the spoon, her lips curled into something I can only describe as anticipation, not love. In that moment, I realized the table that once held laughter now held predators waiting for me to swallow. I need to ask you something. Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you raised, someone you fed, someone you sheltered, and seen only calculation staring back? Have you ever felt the warmth of your home turn into the chill of a graveyard because of the way your children look at you? If you have, then you know the terror I lived in. If you haven't, then count yourself lucky. The cracks in our family were no longer invisible. They were there in the silences, the missing objects, the strange tastes, the whispers at night, the smell of gasoline. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that grief had made me paranoid, but deep down, I knew. Something was being planned, something darker than I could admit, and yet I kept quiet, Because how does a father accuse his own blood of betrayal without proof? How does an old man shout about danger when everyone insists he's just confused? I swallowed my fear, but it burned worse than any fire. If you have ever noticed a loved one change into someone unrecognizable, someone colder, someone you barely know anymore, I want you to comment number 8. Because I was living with strangers who shared my last name, and I didn't even know it yet. Paranoia is heavy, but certainty is heavier. For weeks I lived with the suspicion that something was wrong, that the strange taste in my food, the smell of gasoline, the missing objects were more than accidents. Still part of me clung to denial. It's easier to call yourself paranoid than to admit your children are sharpening knives behind your back. But one night, the truth tore through my illusions like a blade, and from that moment on, I could never pretend again. It happened late long after midnight when the house was supposed to be asleep. I had left my room quietly, my old knees aching, as I moved down the hallway for a glass of water. That's when I heard it, the low murmur of voices too urgent to be casual. I stopped, my breath caught in my throat, and I pressed myself against the wall near the kitchen door. My heart pounded so hard, I thought they would hear it echoing. It was my daughter-in-law's voice first, cold, practical, dripping with contempt. "The insurance company confirmed it," she whispered. "They'll pay out immediately if the fire looks accidental, no questions asked. Enough for us to clear the debts, buy the new house, start fresh." My son's reply cut me deeper than any knife. "Then it has to be soon. He's getting suspicious. Did you see the way he looked at me yesterday? If we don't do it now, we might lose everything." I froze. My legs went weak. I gripped the wall just to keep myself upright. They weren't talking about strangers. They weren't imagining some vague future. They were planning my death. They were plotting how to burn me alive for money. I remember my hands shaking so violently I had to press them against my chest to stop the noise. I leaned closer, desperate, terrified, yet unable to walk away. She continued, her tone sharp. "Make sure the doors are locked from the outside, and don't forget the windows. If he wakes up, he'll try to get out. We need to make sure he can't." And then my son, my flesh and blood, answered with a calmness that chilled me to the bone. "Don't worry, he trusts us too much. He'll go to bed like always. He won't even know what hit him." The world tilted, my vision blurred. It was as if the floor opened beneath me and swallowed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, family. I wanted to scream, to burst into the kitchen and demand, "How could you?" But my voice was trapped behind a wall of disbelief. Instead, I stumbled back to my room, each step heavier than the last, each breath poisoned by betrayal. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the shadows on the wall. The house I had built, the children I had raised, the love I had poured into their lives. It all felt like a cruel trick. Every sacrifice I made, every sleepless night, every tear shed for their happiness had been reduced to numbers on an insurance form. I was not a father to them anymore. I was a paycheck waiting to be cashed. That night I did not sleep. I listened to every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind, convinced it might be the last sound I ever heard. I thought of my wife, her voice telling me, "Protect them no matter what." And I wondered, had I failed her? Had I raised monsters instead of children? In the early hours of the morning, I made a decision. I would run. I would leave the house before they could strike. But when I tried the door, it was already bolted from the outside. The windows too locked tight, the glass reinforced. They had already begun to trap me like an animal in a cage. My own home had become my prison, and the people I loved were the jailers. I sat back down, heart racing, and for the first time in my life, I prayed not for strength, but for clarity. If this was how my life was going to end, I wanted to face it with eyes wide open. I wanted to see the truth before the fire consumed me. And in that moment of despair, I remembered the music box. I reached for it on the shelf, wound the key slowly, and let the melody spill into the silent room. The fragile notes trembled through the air, as though my wife was sitting beside me, whispering that I was not alone. That little sound kept me sane. It told me that even if the people of flesh and blood betrayed me, the memory of love could still protect me. Now, I want to ask you something. If you heard your children plotting your death, what would you do? Would you confront them and risk accelerating the plan? Would you run and risk being hunted like prey? Or would you stay silent, praying for a miracle? Comment number 9. If you believe hearing the truth can sometimes be more terrifying than living in doubt. That was my reality. The twist that shattered every illusion. I was not paranoid. I was not imagining. They wanted me dead, and the fire was their weapon. The music box was my only companion that night, the only voice reminding me I was still human, still alive, still worth more than the ashes they hoped to collect. Once you know the truth, you can't unhear it. After that night in the hallway, every sound in the house became a threat. Every glance from my children carried hidden meaning. Every meal placed before me felt like a weapon disguised as kindness. Certainty is cruel. Doubt at least allows you to hope you're wrong. Certainty chains you in terror with no escape. The days that followed were long, suffocating. I tried to act normal, tried to keep my face calm, my voice steady, but inside, I was shaking. When my daughter handed me tea, I stared at it too long before touching it. When my son laughed, the sound cut like glass. When my daughter-in-law kissed my cheek, I felt the chill of a blade. They noticed my hesitation. I saw the flicker of suspicion in their eyes, as if they wondered whether I had discovered their secret. And so, they watched me more closely, circling like wolves around a wounded deer. The house itself became part of the conspiracy. The locks on the windows, once a measure of safety, now trapped me. The doors, once thresholds of welcome, now sealed me in. I realized how powerless I was. My body was old, slow, and theirs were strong, calculating. Even if I ran, where would I go? Who would believe an old man claiming his children were plotting to burn him alive? The world would call me senile, paranoid, a grieving widower seeing monsters in shadows. And maybe that was exactly what my children were counting on. One morning, I tried to slip out early, hoping to make it to the police station before anyone noticed. But when I reached for the front door, the key was gone. I searched every drawer, every pocket, every corner of the kitchen, but the key had vanished. Later that day, my son casually jingled it in his pocket while we ate lunch, his smirk just wide enough to let me know he was in control. "Don't worry, Dad," he said. "We'll keep you safe. You don't need to leave the house." Safe. The word twisted in my stomach. Safety had turned into prison, love into surveillance. I began to understand that the plan was already in motion, that I was not just waiting for betrayal, it was coming closer every hour. The smell of gasoline grew stronger. I caught it in the hallway, in the laundry, even seeping into my bedroom at night. I once found a rag soaked in fuel beneath the sink. When I confronted my daughter-in-law, she laughed, shaking her head as though I had lost my mind. "You're imagining things, old man. Maybe you should rest." The way she said "old man" instead of "dad" sliced me open. She no longer saw me as family. I was an obstacle, a problem to erase. At dinner, my youngest son joked about inheritance. "When you're gone, Dad, who gets the house, who gets the land?" His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, hungry. My other son nudged him to stop, but the damage was done. The air grew heavier, the silence stretched, and I realized they no longer bothered to hide their intentions. It was only a matter of time before whispers became action. I stopped sleeping through the night. Every creak of the floorboards jolted me awake. I would sit upright in bed, holding the music box in my hands as though it could shield me from fire. I started leaving little notes around the house, hidden behind picture frames, slipped into books, tucked inside my shoes, messages that said, "If I die, it was not an accident." Maybe someone would find them one day. Maybe someone would know the truth. I grew thinner. My body weakened under the weight of fear. Eating felt dangerous, sleeping felt suicidal, breathing felt temporary. Yet, I couldn't leave. My wife's memory lived in those walls, her scent still clinging to the curtains, her laughter echoing in the empty kitchen. How could I abandon the house we built together, even if it had turned into a cage? The tension escalated further one evening when the power went out. Darkness swallowed the house. I lit a candle, and in that flickering light, I saw the reflection of my son watching me from the hallway. He didn't speak. He just stood there, eyes fixed on me, until the silence became unbearable. When I asked what he wanted, he disappeared into the shadows. I knew then they were waiting for the right moment, the perfect night to strike. I wanted to scream, to confront them, to shout, "I know what you're planning," but I didn't. Because once words are spoken, there is no return. I thought silence might buy me time, though every second felt like a countdown. Let me ask you something. If you were trapped in a house with your own blood plotting your death, what would you do? Would you confront them head-on and risk being silenced immediately? Would you run and risk being hunted down like prey? Or would you wait, praying that fate might intervene? Comment. Okay, if you believe silence sometimes feels like the only weapon left. The days became a blur of dread. My children spoke to me less, and to each other more. Their whispers echoed down the hallways, their footsteps lingered too long outside my door. And then one night, as I pretended to sleep, I heard the words that told me my time was up. Tomorrow, my daughter-in-law hissed. We can't wait any longer. He's frail. He won't survive it. By morning, it'll be over. My blood turned to ice. I gripped the music box so hard the edges dug into my palms. Tomorrow. That was the deadline. Tomorrow, I would no longer exist. The night came colder than any before. The wind howled outside the windows, rattling them, as though nature itself knew what was about to happen. I went to bed that evening with my heart racing, my skin crawling. I had overheard their whispers, their deadline. Tomorrow, they had said. But in my bones, I knew they would not wait for sunrise. Darkness is the ally of betrayal. Fire burns brightest when the world is asleep. I lay beneath my blanket, the music box clutched tight in my hand like a talisman. My eyes refused to close. Every creak of the floorboards made me tense. Every sigh of the house made me hold my breath. Minutes stretched into hours, and then I smelled it, the sharp, unmistakable sting of gasoline sliding under the door, invading the air. My chest tightened. This was it. They were going to kill me while I lay helpless, dreaming of peace. I heard the scrape of a match, a faint hiss. Then a whoosh as flames came alive, licking the edges of the door. The fire spread quickly, greedily crawling up the walls like a predator unleashed. Heat blasted against my skin. Smoke filled my lungs, and my eyes watered as I struggled to breathe. The world around me blurred into orange and black, the crackle of burning wood drowning out every thought. I stumbled from the bed, coughing, choking, groping in the dark for a way out. But the window was locked tight, sealed from the outside. The door handle glowed red with heat. My room was a coffin, and the fire was nailing it shut. My knees buckled, my chest screamed for air, and I felt the darkness closing in. And then it happened. A crash. A sudden thud. The music box, the one my wife had treasured, tumbled from the top shelf of the wardrobe and hit the floor. Its fragile spring wound itself free, and the melody burst into the chaos. A delicate, trembling tune, completely out of place in the inferno, but piercing through it like a voice from beyond. That sound jolted me awake inside the nightmare. My wife's melody, her promise, her love. I gasped, forcing myself upright. With the strength of desperation, I grabbed the metal chair by my desk and hurled it against the window. Once, twice, 3 times. Glass shattered, shards flying, smoke billowing out. Cold night air rushed in, mixing with the suffocating heat. I pulled myself through, cutting my arms on the broken frame, but I didn't care. I was alive. As I tumbled into the snow outside, coughing, gasping, my neighbors were already awake, drawn by the sight of flames bursting through the roof. They ran toward me, shouting my name, grabbing blankets, calling the fire department. And in the flickering light of the blaze, I saw them, my children, standing at a distance watching. Their faces were not twisted with fear for me. They were frozen in shock that I had survived. Rage rose in me like the fire behind me. For 70 years I had swallowed my anger, my disappointment, my grief. But now, with smoke pouring from my lungs and betrayal carved into my heart, I unleashed it. I pointed at them with a trembling, burned hand and screamed so loud my voice tore. They tried to kill me. My own children set this fire. Look at them. Look at their faces. The crowd fell silent. Neighbors who had known us for decades turned their eyes toward my sons and my daughter-in-law. And in that moment, their guilty stillness was louder than any denial could ever be. Police sirens cut through the night as firemen battled the blaze. I clutched the music box in my bleeding hands, holding it high, like proof of a miracle. "This saved me," I shouted. "She saved me, and they tried to erase me." My voice cracked, but I did not stop. Every word was a knife hurled back at the monsters I had raised. My eldest son stepped forward, his voice shaking, trying to mask panic with false concern. "He's confused. The fire was an accident. He's old. He doesn't know what he's saying." But the neighbors had already seen too much, the way the windows had been locked, the way the children had lingered in the shadows instead of rushing to help, the way I stood there, half burned, half dead, accusing my own blood. The officers pulled them aside, questioning them, separating them from each other. Their answers tangled their lies, collapsing. One of them, under pressure, cracked. My youngest muttered words that sealed their fate. It was supposed to be quick. He wasn't supposed to get out. The officer's pen froze. The crowd gasped, and my heart shattered all over again. I wanted to fall to my knees to scream, to collapse into the snow, but I stood tall instead. I wanted them to see me alive, to know their plan had failed, to know that dignity could not be burned away. I looked at my daughter, the same daughter I once cradled when she was sick, and I saw nothing of her mother's kindness in her anymore. I saw only greed, cold and pitiless. Neighbors whispered among themselves, some crying, some shaking their heads. Betrayal this deep is not just personal, it infects the community. People who had once admired my family now looked at them as predators in human skin. The fire raged on, devouring the house I had built with my wife, reducing decades of memory to ash. But I no longer cared about walls or wood. What mattered was that the truth had been set ablaze alongside it, impossible to extinguish. I need to ask you this now. If you saw your own children standing there, guilty and silent, knowing they had tried to burn you alive, would you forgive them, or would you demand justice even if it meant destroying the last thread of family left? Comment yes. If you believe betrayal, this deep deserves no forgiveness. That night, as the fire finally died, and the police led my children away in handcuffs, I stood in the snow wrapped in a blanket, clutching the music box against my chest. Its melody had stopped the spring wound down, but I swore I could still hear it faintly whispering through the smoke. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was survival. It was proof it was my wife's hand reaching through death to drag me back into the world of the living. I was alive, and they were exposed. That was the climax of a lifetime of trust turned into betrayal. The fire left nothing but black skeletons of wood and walls. My home, the place where I had built a life with my wife, the place where I raised my children, was gone. But I was still standing wrapped in smoke and sorrow, holding the only thing that survived, the music box. Its charred edges and cracked lid carried the same scars I did. We had both been dragged through fire and come out alive. The days that followed were a blur of questions, investigations, police reports, and courtroom whispers. My children were taken into custody. Neighbors gave statements about what they had seen, about how my windows had been locked, about how my children lingered in the shadows instead of rushing to save me. The fire department confirmed the smell of gasoline, the traces of accelerant found in the hallway. Every piece of evidence added weight to my words, to my accusations shouted into the night. I sat in that courtroom weeks later, my hands trembling on the wooden cane, my body still aching from burns. Across from me sat the children I had once fed with these same hands. They wouldn't look at me. Maybe shame blinded them, maybe rage, maybe the sight of me alive was a reminder of their failure. But in their silence, I found no regret, only coldness. The prosecutor read the charges: attempted murder, arson, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. Each word hit like a hammer, yet none hurt as much as the memory of lullabies I once sang to those same faces. They were no longer my children. They had chosen greed over love, money over blood. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, gripping the music box in one hand. I looked at the judge, the jury, the strangers who would decide our fate, and I spoke not just for myself, but for every parent who has ever been betrayed by the ones they raised. I gave them everything I said. I gave them my work, my sweat, my love. I buried my wife, and I raised them alone. I was father and mother both. I taught them compassion, sacrifice, loyalty. But in return, they planned to set me on fire like trash. They tried to turn my home into my grave. Tell me, where is the justice if we allow betrayal this deep to go unanswered? My voice broke, but I did not stop. This music box was my wife's. She told me once it would remind me I was not alone. The night they set the fire, it fell and played. It woke me. It saved me. And I believe her spirit saved me too. If this music box could survive the flames, then so can dignity. Justice must be stronger than betrayal. That is why I stand here not as their father, but as a man asking for the law to protect the living from monsters who carry our blood. The courtroom was silent. The only sound was the trembling melody I played, then winding the music box until its fragile tune floated across the room. Jurors wiped tears. The judge leaned forward. Even the walls seemed to listen. The verdict came hours later: guilty. My children, the ones I once cradled, the ones I once believed would bury me with love, were sentenced to years in prison. When the gavel struck, my heart cracked again, but this time it was not grief, it was release. Justice had spoken where family had failed. Walking out of the courthouse, neighbors gathered around me. Some offered hugs, some shook their heads in disbelief. How could they whispered. And I could only answer, because greed can kill faster than fire. I moved into a small room provided by the church. The house was gone, the family gone, but I still had breath, and I still had dignity. Each night I wound the music box, its broken tune filling the silence. I no longer cried when I heard it. I listened with strength, because it was proof that love outlives betrayal, that even when family destroys you, memory can still lift you back up. One evening, a young man from the neighborhood came to see me. He sat quietly, eyes full of questions he couldn't ask. Finally, he said, "Sir, how do you live, knowing your own children tried to kill you?" I thought for a long time before answering. I live because dignity matters more than blood. Family is not defined by names or DNA. Family is who protects you, who loves you when no one else will. Sometimes the people you call strangers show more loyalty than the ones you call your own. Remember that. Now I want to turn to you. If you had to choose between blood ties and your dignity, which would you protect? If you believe dignity is worth more than blind loyalty to betrayal, comment number 9. Because I am telling you this story, not for pity, but to remind you that betrayal is real, but survival is possible. I am 70 years old, my house is gone, my children are gone, but I am still here. And as long as I can still wind this music box, as long as I can still hear its fragile tune, I will keep telling my story. Because fire cannot destroy dignity, and betrayal cannot silence truth. So, I leave you with this confession: I was supposed to die in that fire. I was supposed to be reduced to ashes so they could cash a check. But love, my wife's love, my love for dignity burned brighter. If you believe love and dignity can survive even the cruelest betrayal, then stand with me. Leave your voice here. Let the world know that justice matters, that no fire can erase it.